My husband Caleb stood in the center of the living room, holding his scotch like a trophy. He laughed and said, "If I ever got the chance, I'd leave her for Tessa in a heartbeat." Everyone roared with laughter, including Tessa, my best friend of 15 years. I forced a smile, but my stomach turned cold. That night, I found a hotel reservation on our shared iPad. It was not a joke. It was an itinerary. So I started packing. My name is Harper Lane. I am 34 years old, living in the gray, steel-boned city of Pittsburgh, and I calculate disasters for a living. I spent my 20s waiting tables at a diner where I learned to read hungry eyes, but for the last 5 years, I have been a claims adjuster for Northbridge Claims. My job is simple. I look at the wreckage, I identify the liability, and I decide who pays. I never thought I would have to apply that same cold, deductive logic to my own marriage, but life has a funny way of serving you the bill when you least expect it. It started on a Tuesday night in late September. We were at a steakhouse downtown, celebrating my husband Caleb's promotion to regional director. The air smelled of expensive red wine and charred meat. Caleb stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with the kind of confidence that usually comes with a 6-figure salary. He raised his glass, looking around at our friends, and then his eyes landed on Tessa Monroe. Tessa has been my best friend for 15 years. She was the maid of honor who held my bouquet while I pledged my life to this man. Caleb laughed, a loud, booming sound that commanded the room. "You know," he said, grinning like a schoolboy, "if I ever got the chance, I'd leave her for Tessa in a heartbeat." The room erupted. Everyone laughed. It was the kind of laughter that excuses everything, the sound of people who believe they are untouchable. I froze. My smile stayed plastered on my face, a rigid mask, but my blood ran cold. I looked at Tessa. She was laughing too, but her timing was off. She started a fraction of a second later than everyone else. Then I saw it. She reached out and squeezed Caleb's forearm. It was not a friendly tap. Her fingers lingered on the fabric of his suit jacket, squeezing just tight enough to claim ownership. The ride home was suffocating. I stared out at the passing streetlights, waiting for him to apologize. He did not. "You are being quiet," Caleb said, his voice flat. "That joke," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It wasn't funny." "Caleb," he sighed, the sound of a man burdened by an unreasonable child. "Oh, come on, do not start this. You are so sensitive lately. It is exhausting. You said you would leave me?" I said, if... He snapped, gripping the steering wheel. "It was a joke. Harper, you always do this. You take a happy moment and you ruin it because you are insecure. Just let it go." He punished me with silence for the rest of the night. He went to bed early, turning his back to me, wrapping himself in the duvet like a wall. I stayed up. I sat in the living room with the iPad we shared for household expenses, staring at the blank screen. At 2 a.m, a notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was a calendar sync. Reservation confirmed. The Omni William PIN. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tapped the notification. It was a booking for October 14th, a Friday night when Caleb claimed he had a networking retreat in Cleveland. The name on the reservation was listed simply as C.H. I did not scream. I did not storm into the bedroom and wake him up. My training at Northbridge Claims took over. When you see a crack in the foundation, you do not kick it, you measure it. I opened a new note on my phone. I titled it Groceries to keep it safe. I typed the date. I typed the time. I typed the reservation number. Then I opened the confirmation email to see the details. That is when the floor dropped out from under me. The guest list did not say Tessa Monroe. It listed the second guest as T.A.M., but it was the special request section that made me nauseous. Under comments, it read, "Request corner room. Please ensure route to elevators avoids main hallway cameras if possible." That was not the request of a man having a drunken fling. That was the request of a man who plans his deceit like a military operation. I looked at the bedroom door. Caleb was sleeping soundly, secure in the belief that I was just his sensitive, overreacting wife. He thought the joke was that he would leave me if he had the chance. He did not realize I had just seen the itinerary. I sat there in the dark and made a decision. I would not pack a suitcase. That is what emotional women do in movies. Instead, I started packing the truth. I began to document every dollar, every text, every strange absence. I was going to pack up his lies, one by one, until the weight of them crushed him. 10 years of marriage can feel like a lifetime when you are looking at it through a rearview mirror. Caleb was never the kind of monster you see in movies. He never raised a hand to me. He never called me names or threw vases against the wall. His cruelty was quiet. It was efficient. He managed me the same way he managed his portfolio, with conditional kindness and strict oversight. For a decade, I thought I was lucky. "I handle the heavy lifting. Harper," he would say, tapping his gold pen against the kitchen counter. "You do not need to worry your pretty head about interest rates or tax brackets. I take care of the finances so you can relax." It sounded like love. It felt like safety. But in reality, safety meant I had no passwords. I had no access to our savings. I carried a supplementary credit card with a daily spending limit of $200. If I wanted to buy a dress for one of his company galas that cost more than that, I had to ask him to unlock the funds. I had to ask for permission to look good for him. He isolated me with that same terrifying benevolence. He pruned my life like a bonsai tree until only the branches he approved of remained. My college friends were too loud. My old co-workers from the diner were, in his words, lacking ambition. "They just drag you down. Harper," he would say, looking at me with feigned pity, "you are better than that. You do not need that kind of negative energy." So I let them go. I drifted away until the only friend left was Tessa. He encouraged that friendship. He watered that branch. "Go see Tessa," he would urge when I seemed restless or unhappy. "She has a good head on her shoulders. She calms you down. You are always so much more reasonable after you talk to her." I thought he cared about my mental health. Now I see the truth. Tessa was not a friend. She was a handler. She was the approved distraction who kept me docile while he lived his other life. I had become an accessory, a silent partner who stood by his side at charity auctions, holding a glass of lukewarm champagne I was not allowed to finish, smiling until my facial muscles spasmed. My real life had been shrunk down to the size of our kitchen island and his Google Calendar. But Caleb made a critical error. He forgot what I do for a living. At Northbridge Claims, I spend 8 hours a day analyzing the things people try to hide. My boss, a gruff man named Miller, taught me the most important lesson of my life. He told me that if it is not written down, it never happened. And if it is written down but the timestamp is wrong, someone is lying. I learned to look for the negative space, the things that were missing from the picture. I applied Miller's logic to my husband. 2 days after the dinner party, I went into Caleb's home office to dust. I usually respected his privacy, but the invisible line had been crossed. I found a file on his desk labeled equipment leasing. I opened it. Inside was a loan agreement for $45,000 for office server upgrades. My breath hitched. My name was listed as the cosigner. At the bottom of the page, there was a signature that spelled Harper Lane. I ran my finger over the ink. It looked like my handwriting. It had the same loops, the same slant. But I had never seen this document before in my life. I had never signed it. Caleb had legally tethered me to a debt I knew nothing about. I closed the folder and put it back exactly where it was, matching the edge of the file to the grain of the wood desk. I did not confront him. Instead, I watched. I studied him like a claimant with a suspicious neck injury. I noticed his tell. When Caleb told the truth, he looked around the room or checked his watch. When he lied, he stared straight into my eyes, unblinking, challenging me to doubt him. His sentences became too perfect, polished and rehearsed like a sales pitch. I have to work late on Thursday, he said that morning, locking eyes with me. Big merger coming up. Do not wait up. I nodded. But later that night, while he was in the shower, I checked his phone. The call log was empty. He had a habit I had never noticed before. Every Thursday night, before he plugged his phone into the charger, he swiped left and cleared his history. He was scrubbing the record. He thought he was being careful, but to a claims adjuster, a blank log is the loudest evidence of all. I needed to see her face. 2 days after the dinner party, I texted Tessa and asked her to meet me for coffee. I wanted to see if she would look me in the eye. We met at a small cafe on Walnut Street, the kind of place where the baristas know your order and the air smells like roasted beans and cinnamon. Tessa was already there, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she jumped up and hugged me a little too tightly. "Harper, I am so glad you called," she said, pulling back to look at me. "I was worried about you after the other night." I sat down and wrapped my hands around my warm mug. "It was a weird night," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Caleb has been distant?" Tessa waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know Caleb. He just says stupid things when he has had a few drinks. He was just joking. Harper, you know that. Right." She leaned in, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that felt invasive. "But is he mad? Did you make a scene when you got home? You know how much he hates drama." The question hung in the air. She was not asking how I felt. She was fishing for information. She wanted to know if her cover was blown. I did not say much. I lied. I just went to bed. Tessa visibly relaxed. She took a sip of her latte. "Good. That is good. He has so much stress right now with the new promotion and that trip to Cleveland. He needs to focus. I heard the Omni has terrible room service, so hopefully he eats out." I froze. I had never told Tessa the name of the hotel. Caleb had only told me he was going to Cleveland. The hotel name was only on the confirmation email I had seen on the iPad, the one sent to C8 and T.M. "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Hopefully." When I got home, the house felt like a crime scene that had been scrubbed clean. Caleb was at work. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I logged into our joint checking account. Usually, I only looked at the balance to make sure we had enough for groceries, but this time I went into the transaction history. I scrolled back 6 months. At first, everything looked normal. Mortgage, utilities, grocery runs. But then I saw them. Small, irregular transfers ranging from $50 to $200. They were labeled with vague descriptors like ops bridge and routing hold. They were small enough to ignore. But they added up. A memory flashed in my mind. 3 months ago, I had walked past Caleb's home office while he was on a call. He had his back to the door, voice low. "Just push it through bridge hold until the end of the quarter," he had said. When I walked in, he hung up immediately and told me it was just a boring supply chain issue. I closed the laptop and drove to a used bookstore in the South Side. I bought 3 books on forensic accounting and asset tracing. I paid cash. I spent the next 4 hours hidden in a corner of the public library, learning terms like shell company and commingling of funds. I learned that fraud is rarely a single explosion. It is a slow leak. When I returned home, I went to our shared desktop computer in the living room. We used it for storing family photos and tax documents. I clicked on the main drive. There was a folder labeled Kitchen Remodel. We had remodeled our kitchen 4 years ago. The folder should have been empty or full of old tile samples. I hovered the mouse over it. The last modified date was yesterday. My pulse hammered in my throat. I opened the folder. Inside, there were no photos of granite countertops. There was a single PDF file named Corp Structure V4 PDF. I wanted to click it. I wanted to rip it open and see the truth. But Northbridge Claims had trained me better than that. If I opened the file, the metadata would show that Harper Lane accessed it. He could claim I tampered with it. He could claim I planted it. Instead, I inserted a USB drive. I copied the file without opening it. I took a screenshot of the folder's creation date and the file's properties. I opened a physical notebook and wrote down the time, the date, and the action I took, creating a chain of custody just like I would for a damaged vehicle report. I was not just a jealous wife anymore. I was building a case. I pulled the USB drive out and slipped it into my pocket. I would read it later, on a device he did not own, in a place he could not track. The next piece of the puzzle arrived not in a whispered rumor, but in a delivery confirmation email that Caleb had deleted but failed to purge from the trash folder. It was for a diamond tennis bracelet, valued at $4,500. The delivery address was his private office at the firm, but the proof of delivery image showed a signature that made my stomach turn. It was a scrawl I had seen on birthday cards for 15 years, received by T. Monroe. She was not just sleeping with him, she was signing for his packages. She was his gatekeeper. I decided to test the perimeter. On Thursday afternoon, at 3 o'clock, I sent Caleb a text, stuck in a meeting with a difficult claimant. Won't be home until 8. Don't wait for me for dinner. His reply came back within 30 seconds. That sucks, babe. Don't work too hard. I'll grab something near the office. I was not at the office. I was parked 3 blocks away from our house in a rental car I had paid for with cash. At 5:15, the garage door opened. Caleb's BMW pulled out. He was not wearing his work suit. He was wearing the navy blazer he saved for special occasions, and he was driving fast. I did not tail him closely. I did not need to. I knew exactly where he was going. I drove to the Omni William Penn Hotel and pulled into the parking garage. I did not storm the lobby. I did not demand a room key. I drove up to level 4 and found his car parked near the elevator. I parked 2 spots away, turned off my headlights, and took out my phone. I photographed his license plate. I photographed the valet ticket on his dashboard. I photographed the digital clock on the wall that read 6:20 p.m. I was documenting his location during a time he claimed to be working. In the eyes of the court, I was establishing a timeline of deceit. I drove home in silence. When I walked into the empty house, the air felt stagnant. I opened my laptop and logged into the router's admin panel. At 6:40, Caleb's personal email account logged in via a remote IP address. He was checking his messages from the hotel Wi-Fi. I took a screenshot. Then, my phone buzzed. It was Tessa. Hey, are you okay? I had a weird feeling and just wanted to check on you. I stared at the screen. The timing was surgical. Caleb had likely just arrived, settled into the room, and perhaps mentioned my text about working late. Tessa was checking to ensure I was actually where I said I was. It was a containment strategy. I did not reply. Instead, I went upstairs to our bedroom and started packing. I did not pack a suitcase. I opened Caleb's closet. I took out his suits, one by one. I checked the inside pockets for labels. Armani, Hugo Boss, Zegna. I photographed the labels and the receipts I found stuffed in the pockets. I was not looking for lipstick stains. I was looking for marital assets. These were purchases made with community funds. If we were divorcing, half the value of that silk tie was mine. I moved to the back of the closet, where we kept the winter coats. I pushed aside the heavy wool trenches and felt the back panel of the built-in wardrobe. It felt loose. I crouched down and pried the edge with my fingernails. The wood panel popped off, revealing a small, dark gray safe bolted to the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. I did not need a stethoscope to crack it. I remembered something Caleb had done 3 years ago when we bought the house. He had put a spare key for emergency use only inside his red toolbox in the garage, taped under the plastic tray. I went to the garage, retrieved the key, and returned to the closet. I inserted the key. The lock turned with a heavy click. Inside, there was no cash. There were no love letters. There was a small black moleskin notebook and a silver USB drive with a piece of masking tape on it. In Caleb's handwriting, the tape read BHQ4. I opened the notebook. It was a list of passwords, bank accounts, email addresses, and logins for portals I had never heard of. I did not steal the book. I did not take the drive. That would be theft. Instead, I photographed every page of the notebook. I photographed the drive sitting in the safe to prove its location. I was not stealing. I was documenting the contents of our home using a key my husband had provided. I locked the safe, replaced the panel, and hung the coats back in place. I had just found the map to where the bodies were buried. I treated my divorce not as a heartbreak, but as a project management challenge. I took a personal day from Northbridge Claims and went down to the self-help center at the courthouse. I did not want a lawyer yet. I needed to understand the battlefield first. I sat in a small cubicle with flickering fluorescent lights and read manuals on the rules of evidence. I learned how to authenticate digital files, how to preserve metadata, and the specific way to sticker a document as an exhibit. I went home and established a system. I created 3 identical backups of my evidence. One was on a thumb drive attached to my keychain. One was on an external hard drive hidden inside a hollowed-out cookbook in the pantry. The third was a physical binder with printed screenshots. I logged every entry with clinical precision: source, date, time of access. I stripped all emotion from my notes. I did not write that I was angry. I wrote discrepancy noted in joint checking ledger. Then I pulled my credit report. I expected to see the mortgage and my student loans. Instead, I saw a revolving line of credit opened 18 months ago in my name. The limit was $65,000. The balance was $62,000. My hands did not shake. I stared at the origination date. It was a Tuesday in March of last year. I opened my calendar app. On that specific Tuesday, I was not at the bank signing loan documents. I cross-referenced my schedule. I dug through my old emails. I found an invoice from my dentist for a root canal on that exact date and time. I opened my running app and pulled the GPS data from that morning. While someone was forging my signature on a loan application downtown, I was running a 5-mile loop in Frick Park, and then I was sitting in a dentist's chair with my mouth numb. I had him. I had the alibi. I needed to understand the money trail. So I paid $300 for a 1-hour consultation with a forensic accountant I found online. I did not tell him who I was. I just showed him the screenshots of the transfers labeled bridge hold. He adjusted his glasses and pointed to the screen. "This looks like a clearing account," he said. "Companies use these to park money temporarily before moving it to its final destination. But if these transfers are moving out to a third party without an invoice, that is usually called skimming." I needed Caleb to confirm it. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state for recording, which made things tricky. But I knew Caleb's ego was his weak spot. One evening, while he was drinking wine and looking over his quarterly projections, I sat down with my phone on the table, the voice memo app open and visible. "I am just recording some notes for my grocery list," I said, knowing he was not listening. Then I pivoted. "Caleb, you are so good with the business accounts. I do not know how you manage the cash flow so smoothly." He took the bait instantly. He leaned back, swirling his glass. "It is an art form, Harper. Most people just let money sit. You have to move it. You have to route it through the right channels so it does not get eaten up by taxes before it lands where you want it." "Like a bridge?" I asked innocently. "Exactly," he said, smirking. "A bridge to hold it safe." He had just admitted to the mechanism on tape. But the final piece of the puzzle was the one that hurt the most. I was going through the vendor list for Caleb's company, searching for the recipient of the funds from the bridge hold account. I found a recurring payment to a vendor listed as TM Brand Solutions. I searched the state business registry. TM Brand Solutions was registered to Tessa Monroe. My best friend was not just sleeping with my husband. She was on his payroll. She was listed as a brand consultant, receiving $2,500 a month from the very account Caleb was using to siphon money out of our marriage. I closed the laptop. The financial quarter was set to close on September 30th. Caleb would be busy finalizing his books, moving money around to make the numbers look perfect for the board. He would be distracted. He would feel safe. That was exactly when I would strike. I would not wait for him to leave me. I drafted the divorce petition that night. I was not filing for irreconcilable differences. I was filing for fraud. The family division of the Allegheny County Courthouse smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. It was a smell I associated with endings, but today, I was there for a beginning. Caleb sat at the respondent's table, looking impeccable in his charcoal suit. Next to him sat Grant Lasker, a divorce attorney known locally as the Scorched Earth. Lasker had built a fortress of thick, leather-bound binders on the table in front of them. It was a display of force, intended to intimidate. I sat alone at the petitioner's table. I had no team. I had no binders. I had a single thin manila folder in my black notebook. I saw Lasker glance at my empty table and smirk. He leaned over to Caleb and whispered something that made Caleb chuckle. They thought I was a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. They did not know I was the butcher. Judge Rylance called the session to order. She was a woman with sharp eyes and very little patience for theatrics. Lasker stood up immediately, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor," Lasker boomed, his voice filling the room. "Mr. Hart wishes to settle this matter quickly and amicably. Despite the petitioner's erratic behavior, my client is prepared to offer a very generous settlement. We are offering the marital home, fully paid off, plus a lump sum of $150,000 and 6 months of rehabilitative alimony." He paused for effect, then slid a document across the table toward me. "However," Lasker added, his voice dropping to a serious register, "this offer is contingent upon Ms. Lane signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding Mr. Hart's business dealings and personal matters." Caleb turned to me. He put on his best sympathetic face, the one he used when he wanted to manipulate me. "Harper," he said, his voice dripping with faux concern, "just sign it. Do not torture yourself. You know you cannot handle the stress of a trial. Take the house. Be happy." I looked at the document. It was a gag order wrapped in money. It was designed to buy my silence so he could continue his life with Tessa without a ripple. I did not look at Caleb. I looked at Judge Rylance. "I am representing myself. Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady. "And I cannot accept this offer." Lasker sighed loudly, rolling his eyes. "Your Honor, this is exactly what I mean. The petitioner is being unreasonable. I am not being unreasonable." I cut in. "I am being thorough. I have reviewed the financial affidavit submitted by Mr. Hart, under oath. He claims to have disclosed all assets and business accounts." "That is correct," Lasker snapped. "Mr. Hart has been completely transparent." I opened my thin folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the screenshot of the file directory I had found, the one with the modified date. "Then," I said, looking directly at Caleb, "I would like to ask why the affidavit does not list the business entity known as Bridgehold Operations." The room went silent. It was the kind of silence that happens when a glass breaks in a crowded restaurant. Caleb blinked. He did not look at me. He looked at Lasker. Lasker frowned. He leaned down to Caleb. "What is she talking about?" he whispered, but the microphones on the table were sensitive. "What is Bridgehold?" Caleb shifted in his chair. He tugged at his collar. It is just a clearing account. It is dormant. It does not matter." I looked at the judge. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that Bridgehold Operations is not dormant. I have evidence of significant monthly transfers into this account, which are then routed to third-party vendors without corresponding invoices. If this account was omitted from the affidavit, it constitutes a hidden marital asset." Lasker stood up, his face reddening. "Objection. This is a fishing expedition. My client's business structure is complex, and sit down, Mr. Lasker," Judge Rylance said. Her voice was ice cold. She was staring at Caleb. She had seen the panic. She had seen the whisper. In a courtroom, body language is often louder than testimony. The judge turned to the court stenographer. Let the record show that the respondent appeared unsure of his own financial disclosures. She turned back to Lasker. I am granting the petitioner's request for discovery. I want to see 24 months of bank statements for the Bridgehold operations account. I want the general ledger, and I want to see every transaction record related to payments made to a vendor listed as... She glanced down at the note I had submitted. TM Brand Solutions. The judge finished. Or any consulting payments made to a Ms. Tessa Monroe. Caleb froze. The smile was gone. His face was gray. He looked at me with genuine fear for the first time in our marriage. He realized that I had not just found the money. I had connected the money to the mistress. I sat down and opened my black notebook. I did not smile. I picked up my pen and wrote a single sentence while Caleb whispered frantically to his lawyer. He is afraid of the word Bridgehold. We will reconvene in 2 weeks, Judge Rylance said, banging her gavel. And Mr. Lasker, tell your client that if I find one more hidden account, I will hold him in contempt. Caleb looked at me across the aisle. His eyes were wide, pleading. I closed my notebook and stood up. I had not said much, but I had said enough to bleed him dry. The war did not stay in the courtroom. It followed me out onto the street and seeped into the machinery of my daily life. 20 minutes after the hearing adjourned, I stopped at a gas station to fill up my rental car. I swiped my card. The screen flashed a red error message. I tried again. It says declined, miss, the attendant said, looking bored. I called the bank immediately. The customer service representative sounded robotic. I am sorry, Mrs. Hart, but the primary account holder has placed a freeze on all supplementary cards due to reported suspicious activity. You will need to contact him to resolve this. Caleb was cutting off my oxygen. He knew I had cash savings hidden, but this was about control. He wanted me to ask him for permission to buy gas. I paid with a $20 bill from my wallet and drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I got to my temporary apartment, there was a letter taped to the door. It was from the property management company. It stated that due to a clerical processing error, my security deposit had been voided and I needed to submit a new cashier's check for $2,000 within 24 hours or face eviction. It was not a coincidence. I knew that the management firm had a shipping contract with Caleb's logistics company. He was pulling strings, calling in favors to make the ground beneath my feet unstable. The attacks escalated the next morning at Northbridge Claims. My boss, Miller, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. Harper, he said, shifting papers on his desk. We got a strange call today, a reference check. They were asking some pretty pointed questions about your emotional stability. They asked if you had been displaying signs of paranoia or erratic behavior in the workplace. My stomach dropped. They were trying to discredit me professionally. If I was painted as unstable, my testimony about the fraud would look like the ravings of a scorned, hysterical wife. I hope you told them I am the best adjuster you have, I said, meeting his gaze. Miller nodded slowly. I told them you spot things no one else sees. But watch your back, Harper. By noon, a courier delivered a new settlement proposal from Grant Lasker. It was an insult printed on heavy bond paper. The monetary offer had been slashed. They were now offering me $75,000, half of the original amount. The non-disclosure agreement was thicker, 5 pages of dense legal jargon. There was a new clause in bold text. Any communication with the Internal Revenue Service or law enforcement regarding the respondent's business practices will result in an immediate penalty of $50,000 and forfeiture of all spousal support. They were terrified. That penalty clause was practically a confession. I did not call Grant. I did not cry. I sat down at my laptop and drafted an emergency motion. I filed for an immediate freeze on all marital assets to prevent dissipation. I petitioned for an injunction against incurring new debt in my name. My writing was not emotional. It was cold, precise, and cited the exact statutes regarding fiduciary duty between spouses. Caleb pushed back harder. He began whispering to our mutual acquaintances. My phone lit up with texts from friends I had not heard from in months. "Harper, I heard you're having a breakdown. Is it true?" One read. He was spinning a narrative that I was mentally ill, that my accusations were delusions born of anxiety. Then came the legal blow. Grant Lasker filed a motion requesting my medical records. Specifically, he wanted the notes from the 6 months of therapy I had attended 2 years ago. The filing claimed they needed to assess my distorted perception of reality to determine if I was fit to manage financial assets. It was a violation. It was cruel. But as I looked at the motion, I realized they had handed me a weapon. I pulled out my own records. I lined up the dates of my therapy sessions with the dates of the suspicious transfers in the Bridgehold account. 2 years ago, on May 12th, I had gone to therapy because I felt a crushing, unexplained anxiety. I told my therapist, "I feel like something is being taken from me, but I don't know what." On May 12th of that same year, Caleb had transferred $12,000 out of our savings into a shell company. On August 4th, I had a panic attack in the grocery store. On August 4th, Caleb had forged my signature on the equipment lease. I looked at the timeline. It matched perfectly. I was not paranoid. My subconscious had been screaming at me that I was being robbed, but I had just lacked the evidence to prove it. I picked up my pen. I was going to turn his smear campaign into my strongest exhibit. "He wants to prove I am crazy," I whispered to the empty room. "I am going to prove that my body knew he was a thief before my brain did." The air in the courtroom was thin and sharp, vibrating with the tension of a string pulled to its breaking point. Dorian Pike, the chief financial officer of Caleb's company, sat in the witness box. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car and projected an air of board competence. Grant Lasker had coached him well. "The Bridgehold account is merely a clearing mechanism," Dorian stated, his voice smooth. "It is standard industry practice. Funds enter, funds leave. It is a pass-through entity for operational liquidity. It does not accumulate capital." I stood up. I did not have a law degree, but I had a timeline that screamed fraud. "Mr. Pike," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "you claim the account does not accumulate capital. Then can you explain the series of 4 transfers, totaling $210,000, that were deposited into Bridgehold between August 1st and August 3rd? Dorian blinked. He adjusted his glasses. As I said, operational liquidity requires those dates. I interrupted, stepping closer to the podium. That was exactly 3 days before my husband filed his initial separation paperwork. If the account is for operations, why did that specific sum sit untouched for 6 weeks? Dorian did not answer immediately. His eyes darted to the right. He looked directly at Caleb. It was a fleeting glance, a split-second check for instructions, but in the silence of the courtroom, it was a scream. Judge Rylance saw it. Her pen stopped moving. I am not sure of the specific transaction you are referencing without my ledger," Dorian stammered. "I can help you with that," I said. I approached the bench and handed the bailiff a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I am submitting Exhibit D. These are the transaction logs for the Bridgehold account, cross-referenced with internal emails authorized by a digital signature belonging to Mr. Hart." I turned back to Dorian. "I am also submitting Exhibit E. I found this file in a folder on our home computer labeled Kitchen Remodel. It is not a design for a backsplash. It is a memo from Mr. Hart to you, Mr. Pike, dated July 15th. I read the text aloud, my voice ringing off the mahogany walls. "Please pause all reconciliation on the Bridgehold ledger until my personal matters are concluded. Keep the float high." Caleb shot up from his chair. "Objection. That is privileged corporate information." "She stole trade secrets overruled," Judge Rylance said without looking up from the document. "Mr. Hart, this file was located on a shared family drive in a folder named after a domestic renovation project. You had no reasonable expectation of privacy. Sit down." Caleb sank back into his chair. His face was pale. Judge Rylance looked at Dorian Pike, then at Caleb. This court is not satisfied with the explanations provided regarding the nature of these funds. I am ordering an immediate, independent forensic audit of the Bridgehold account and all associated limited liability companies. Mr. Hart, you will bear the full cost of this audit. Until the audit is complete, all assets in these accounts are frozen. The gavel hit the wood with a sound like a gunshot. But I was not done. I needed to tie the theft to the betrayal. I needed the judge to see that he was not just hiding money. He was spending our future on his past. Your Honor, one last thing, I said. I pulled out the final sheet of paper from my folder. If the audit is looking for outflows, I would like to direct the court's attention to the payments made to TM Brand Solutions. I am submitting copies of a hotel invoice from the Omni William Penn, dated October 14th, and a receipt for a diamond bracelet sent to Mr. Hart's office. I placed the papers on the table. The bracelet was signed for by T. Monroe. The consulting fees go to T. Monroe. And the hotel room was booked for 2 guests. I looked at Caleb, who was now staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes. He is not just hiding assets. Your Honor, he is funding a paramour with marital funds disguised as business expenses. The courtroom was dead silent. The pieces had snapped together. The judge looked at Caleb with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. I sat down and opened my black notebook. I did not write a sentence this time. I just drew a single, straight line through the name, Caleb Hart. The packing was almost done. The preliminary audit report did not stay sealed. It leaked into the boardroom of Caleb's company like toxic gas. Rumors began to swirl that the board was demanding an internal explanation for the discrepancies in the quarterly projections. Caleb was no longer just fighting for his money, he was fighting for his seat at the table. The pressure was cracking him. I could see it in the way his tie was always slightly crooked when he arrived at court, in the dark circles that looked like bruises under his eyes. Then came the call that changed the landscape of the war. It was from a man named Mason Reed, a former junior analyst at Caleb's firm who had resigned quietly 3 months ago. We met in the back booth of a diner on the outskirts of the city. Mason looked terrified. He kept glancing at the door. I need to know if I am liable, Mason said, his voice trembling. If I help you, do I get immunity from the civil suits, if you tell the truth? Mason, you are a whistleblower, I said. If you stay silent, you are an accomplice. Talk to me. Mason took a shaky breath. At the end of the quarter, they have a term for it. They call it mopping the floor. We move the bad debt and the unauthorized expenses into Bridgehold so the main balance sheet looks clean for the investors. Then, after the report is filed, they move it back. He slid a napkin across the table. On it was an address in Boca Raton, Florida. That is not just a shell, Mason whispered. It is a condo, oceanfront, bought with Bridgehold funds 2 years ago. The deed is in his cousin's name, but Caleb holds the power of attorney. I had enough to bury him, but Caleb was not ready to lie down. The next day, Grant Lasker requested an emergency settlement conference. The atmosphere in the conference room was heavy. Grant looked tired. He did not open a binder. Instead, he slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany table. $2.5 million, Grant said. His voice lacked its usual bluster. Plus the deed to the marital home, free and clear. No mortgage. No contests. It was a fortune. It was enough to start 5 new lives. But then came the hook. However, Grant continued, this offer is contingent upon Mrs. Hart withdrawing her motion for the forensic audit and signing a non-disclosure agreement that specifically prohibits reporting any financial findings to the Internal Revenue Service. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at Caleb. He was staring out the window, refusing to meet my gaze. No, I said. Harper. Be reasonable, Grant snapped. This is more money than you will ever see in a lifetime. You are letting your emotions get in the way of a business decision. This isn't business, I said, standing up. And he isn't buying a divorce. He's buying freedom. He knows that if that audit finishes, he goes to federal prison. Caleb turned then. His face was twisted with a kind of desperate malice I had never seen before. He reached into his briefcase and slammed a document onto the table. "You want to play hardball?" Caleb hissed. "Fine. Let's talk about the liability you agreed to. It was a loan guarantee for $1.8 million, taken out by his company. At the bottom was my signature. She is a co-guarantor," Caleb said to my empty chair. "If the company goes down, she goes down with it. She signed this last June." I picked up the document. My heart hammered for a split second, but then my training kicked in. I looked at the date next to the signature, June 12th. I pulled out my phone and opened my medical records app. I scrolled back to June 12th, I said, my voice deadly calm. That was the day I had my biopsy. I was under general anesthesia at Mercy Hospital from 9 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I looked at Grant, who had gone very still. "I have the itemized hospital bill." I continued. "I have the parking garage receipt stamped with the time. And if you check the metadata on this digital signature, I guarantee you will find it was signed from an IP address located in this very building, while I was unconscious 5 miles away." Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The trap he had set for me had just snapped shut on his own leg. I turned to the door, but stopped. I had one final knife to twist. "Grant," I said without looking back. "Add a new name to the mandatory witness list for the final hearing. I want Tessa Monroe on the stand. Since her consulting fees came from the fraudulent account, she is now a material witness to a financial crime." The final hearing was not a battle. It was an autopsy. Judge Rylance sat high on her bench, staring down at the 3 pillars of my case: the concealment of assets, the creation of fraudulent debt in my name, and the systematic gaslighting designed to make me question my own sanity. The courtroom was silent. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I stood up to address the loan guarantee that Caleb claimed I had signed. "Your Honor," I said, my voice echoing off the wood paneling. "Mr. Hart claims I agreed to be a co-guarantor on a loan for $1.8 million on June 12th. I would like to direct your attention to Exhibit F." I projected a slide onto the courtroom screen. On the left was the digital signature log from the loan document. On the right was my hospital discharge summary. The metadata shows this document was signed at 10:30 in the morning from a device with an IP address registered to Mr. Hart's iPad, I explained. At that exact moment, I was in a recovery room at Mercy Hospital, coming out of anesthesia. Unless I can bilocate, that signature is a forgery. Grant Lasker stood up, but he looked defeated. "Your Honor, the petitioner has a history of confusion. She may not remember I cut him off." I did not yell. I just turned to him. "Mr. Lasker, if I am so paranoid, why does the digital signature on that fraudulent loan match the IP address of his device?" Grant sat down. He had nothing left. Then I called Tessa Monroe to the stand. She walked up the aisle in a dress that cost more than my first car. But her hands were shaking. At first, she denied everything. She claimed our friendship was pure, that her role in the company was legitimate. "Ms. Monroe," I said, sliding a paper across the rail. "This is a consulting contract digitally signed by you. The payments come directly from the Bridgehold account, which we have established is funded by diverted marital assets. And this is a hotel invoice for a room booked for 2. Tessa looked at Caleb. He refused to look at her. Her face crumbled. "He told me to do it," she whispered, her voice cracking. It was his idea." "What was his idea?" I asked. "The joke," she admitted, tears spilling over. "At the party, Caleb told me to laugh. He said if we humiliated you publicly, if we made you feel small and insecure, you would be grateful for whatever settlement he offered. He said if you felt worthless, you wouldn't fight for the money." The cruelty of it hung in the air. The joke wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a strategy. Mason Reed took the stand next. He confirmed everything. He explained how they moved money into the Bridgehold account at the end of every quarter to mop the floor and hide liabilities from investors. The independent audit report I submitted matched his testimony down to the cent. Caleb could not take it anymore. He stood up, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. "She is lying," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is just my wife. She does not understand how business works. She is nobody." The courtroom froze. Caleb had just proven my entire case with one sentence. Judge Rylance lowered her glasses. She looked at Caleb with a gaze that could freeze water. "Mr. Hart, sit down. You have just confirmed that you view your wife not as a partner, but as an obstacle to be managed." The judge did not waste time. She delivered her ruling with the precision of a surgeon. "I am finding for the petitioner," she stated, "due to the egregious nature of the concealment. I am awarding a 60-40 split of all marital assets in favor of Ms. Lane. Furthermore, all funds found in the Bridgehold account and the Florida property will be added back into the marital pot at their highest valuation over the last 3 years. Caleb slumped in his chair. "As for the debt," the judge continued, "I am voiding the loan guarantee standing in Ms. Lane's name as it was obtained through fraud. Mr. Hart will be responsible for 100% of Ms. Lane's legal fees and the full cost of the forensic audit." She paused, then looked at the bailiff. "Finally, I am referring the evidence regarding the forged signature and the tax discrepancies to the district attorney's office for review. This court is adjourned." The gavel banged down. It was the best sound I had ever heard. Caleb did not look at me. He was staring at the table, his life dismantling around him. Tessa was weeping in the back row. I did not look at either of them. I picked up my black notebook. I closed it. There was nothing left to write. I had documented every lie, every dollar, and every betrayal. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright sunlight of the hallway. He had joked about leaving me, thinking I was weak. He didn't realize that while he was making jokes, I was doing the only thing I still controlled. I packed the truth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.